You don't have to communicate how you feel when someone has been blatantly disrespectful. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones, and I want to have a conversation about, there's a lot of people, there's like an ongoing debate, and it's been happening for a while, where people are like, if you have a disagreement with a friend, yada yada yada, you need to communicate and blah blah blah. I have a different, school of thought with this, and I've kind of had some debate with this about with a couple of my colleagues. One, a psychiatrist, Dr. Greenlee, and an old buddy of mine, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford, and she and I kind of went on. We kind of discussed this on my podcast a little while back. Their stance is like, oh, why can't women just communicate with their friends? Women should always be able to communicate, even if they want to end the friendship. There's no reason why women should not communicate their thoughts and their feelings, right? That was their whole stance. And my stance is this: when someone has been blatantly disrespectful to you, you do not need to communicate it. Everything that needs to be said has already been said through that disrespect. So you don't have to communicate. I feel like, at this point, communicating is like, beating a dead horse. And it opens up the door for people to come back in and, sort of BS and say, oh, I'm sorry, or I didn't, I'm sorry that you feel that way, and, this and that and the other. I feel like it opens up the door to that kind of stuff, to gaslighting, right? I feel like that's what that kind of stuff opens up the door to. When it's been blatantly disrespectful, when there's been like this sort of overt betrayal, that's it. We're done. We're done. We don't need to talk about anything else. And most people, when they've done something disrespectful, I'm going to go on a limb and say all people, when they've done something disrespectful, they know what they did, they know what time it was, and they basically bent over, pulled down their undies, and mooned you, because that's basically, to me, that's kind of what you're doing when you do that, when it's like overt, blatant disrespect. And that, for me, like, once you disrespect, communication is off, right? And so, and here's another thing. Here's two other things that, I feel like people don't consider. So one school of thought that I have, this is my personal thought, and you guys can tell me what you think about this, but I feel like psychology tells us when children are rejected and neglected, right? They typically experience that for the duration of their lives, right? They typically don't fare well, in particular, children who face rejection. And so along with that school of thought, when you are a person that doesn't have resources, or your resources are limited, meaning that like people in your life are limited, you're kind of surviving, you're on your own, you're doing your thing, you do not have the bandwidth, and especially if you're someone who's kind of experienced abuse, or you've experienced mistreatment over the duration of your life, you were someone that, one, you most likely have the gift to be able to discern when, because that's a pattern, right? When someone abuses you or mistreats you or disrespects you, you probably have had some experience like that, this like sending off alarm bells in your body, like, I already know what this is very familiar. And so you do not have the luxury, right, or benefit of having someone in your life to repeat that pattern again, if that makes sense. So this is something that people with a full support system will never understand. And honestly, it's an argument that they really need to bow out of, or they need to know their place when they're having it, right? Because when you've kind of been through some situations, or your family is kind of, especially if you've been through family betrayal, right? You can't have that, you don't have that luxury to give people the benefit of the doubt, to give them the opportunity for a conversation, right? It's when they've been blatantly disrespectful, when they've been overtly abusive, when they've been calculating and things like that. You don't have that luxury, nor is that a door that you want to open if you've been through that before. Can people that have been abused or been in some toxic situations overreact and self-sabotage? Self-sabotage, absolutely they can, and that does happen. But by and large, what ends up happening is more of the former as opposed to the latter. The former happens when people who've been abused tend to give people that are not good for them the benefit of the doubt, or they dismiss the red flags, or they dismiss all of the warning signals that their body is sending them, and say, I'm overreacting, I'm bringing my trauma. That's not that person. And so what they end up doing is giving people who are disrespectful time and again the opportunity to betray them, right? And so I think that's something that people have to consider. When you have a support system, when you have unlimited resources, you can have the luxury that, and I do feel like that's a luxury, to have conversations with people that are blatantly disrespectful. You can have that. But, if you don't have that, then if you don't have a privilege, then you don't have that. So I hope that makes sense. I also feel like silence is, and I'm not saying that like you have to stonewall people or be mean about it, but I feel like silently detaching, away from that is like, that is a skill that people have used. And again, every situation isn't necessarily the same, but again, I'm talking about situations where people have been grossly disrespected. I feel like the art of detaching silently is like the strongest skill that you can have in being able to do that. So I'm curious to know what you guys think about that.